Today on Locked On Red Wings, 2 weeks after the trade deadline, was Steve Yzerman right to largely stand pat? And also, what does he got to do in the offseason to make sure that this rebuild takes a meaningful step forward?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a sports writer for C&G newspapers, while I am a color commentator for Oakland University, ACHA D1 men's hockey. And Scotty, happy opening day. The Detroit Tigers start their season in LA at 7 o'clock tonight. How pumped are you, buddy?
Extremely. I feel as though I'm a better human being when baseball is in season, and I am very pumped. Going to be hopefully a really fun year, and yeah, a lot could happen in both directions. Really, this could be a really fun year where they kind of catapult themselves up, or it could be a step back of a season. You know, they had to have a miracle run last year to get to even where they were. So we'll see. A lot of interesting storylines over there in Comerica Park, and I am very, very excited. Pumped to watch Skubal go up against the highest payrolled team in the history of baseball
and mow him down with 9 strikeouts across 6 innings. One of my favorite bits that happens at the start of every season is when the Tigers win the first game, somebody will inevitably comment 162-0 coming up. Like, it's just like At the very start of the season, anything's possible. So you lose a game, you win a game. It's like, whatever, you get the rest of the season. You don't have the dire straits that we have right now with just 11 games left here on Locked On Red Wings, which brings us to what we're going to talk about today. But before that, I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Red Wings your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to take a little bit of a retrospective here. 2 weeks after the trade deadline, where the Yzerman largely stood pat, making just one trade of substance, really 2 trades, right? Because he was facilitated the trade of ENERGYHead back to the Tampa Bay Lightning, got a draft pick out of it, but we're not really going to talk about that. That was kind of a nothing trade. You got an asset for helping another team out. Focusing on that one trade they did make, and mostly about all the trades they didn't make, was Yzerman right to do so? Now, 2 weeks later, looking at where this team is at and what kind of hill they have to climb, kind of just with that in mind, Scotty, where are you at on the decision by Yzerman to stand pat 2 weeks after the fact?
Yeah, this is I think an important conversation to have, right? Like it's so easy to criticize or to praise in the moment and not know the results of or the ramifications fully of the actions yet. And I think we have a little bit more of a clearer picture now that we are a few weeks removed, and we know that I shouldn't say we know, but it's looking very likely that the Red Wings are not going to be in the postseason. It's kind of a double-edged sword here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, was he right to stand pat? Well, the team completely fell apart and has looked terrible. So, like, I think there's an argument that it does make sense to not mortgage a ton of the future to invest in this team that's not doing very well. And they started sliding before the trade deadline, right? Like that wasn't like a, post-deadline thing. So we kind of got a glimpse of that, and they never recovered. In the same breath, you could argue, well, if the team needed more pieces, and if you bought, then the team wouldn't be this bad, and they wouldn't have lost the amount of games they did. So I think it's a little bit of a like Pandora's box type of thing, but I think ultimately again, especially because they started sliding before the deadline, I don't know. I go back and forth a lot. I just think that what was given up at the deadline, it would have been would unless they were making a lot of trades, what at the deadline would have completely saved what happened to the Wings? Like, is there anything that they could have done that would have completely prevented the collapse that we saw? I'm not sure the answer.
Right. And I think this is one of those situations where, because we talked about it a lot leading up to it, we were strongly in the camp of soft buy. Obviously, we saw that this team had a lot of flaws, and 2 weeks later, it's proving more right every single game. This team has a lot of flaws, and we wanted them to soft buy. So in theory, you wouldn't be spending a lot on rentals to help bolster your bottom six and your bottom pairings to maybe help, curb some of those shortcomings. But the problem became that very quickly, a lot of these players who are bottom six, bottom pairing guys, Scotty, were going for astronomical prices at the deadline, right? My go-to is always Anthony Beauvillier went for a second-round pick. That is insane. So objectively, I think we can sit here and say Yzerman made logically the correct choice by largely standing pat and making a small move at a reasonable price by bringing in Craig Smith in exchange for Joe Veleno and Peter Mrazek. Obviously there's the conversation to be had about Mrazek having one more year left on his deal, but seeing what goalies who are just middling go with, like the Aiden Hill contract, for instance, is insane for a goalie who, is having a decent season, but isn't a number one starter in this league. You can understand the reasoning behind that, but at the same time also be, as a fan, upset that he didn't really try to do more. That's not fair, because I do believe he tried, but the prices were just too astronomical for what he wanted to do with this roster. Because we're not ready to shell out and get Mikko Rantanen, and the prices for rentals were too much, and I also don't think those rentals, while it may have curbed some of the shortcomings, with how bad those shortcomings are showing themselves right now, wouldn't have helped you get into the playoffs either, if that makes sense. So, like, at the time we were doing it, it was at the start of this slide, and we're thinking to ourselves, okay, there's a couple of issues here that need to be addressed. Can you soft buy and help just kind of Band-Aid them to get you into the playoffs? And well, now 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, he made the right choice, because soft buying, that Band-Aid wasn't going to be big enough. You're falling apart at the seams, and sure, there's an argument to be made, like, you help your team out. That's what we were saying, right? Help your team out. But I think as more time passes, Yzerman is kind of proving more and more correct here post-deadline in not buying at the deadline. But with that being said, Scotty, and we'll talk about this in segment 2, there's still, that doesn't mean he's going to get off scot-free going into this offseason, because this is still his roster, right? What we were talking about before the deadline in regards to, well, why does this team have so many holes, stands true. It's Yzerman's fault this team still has so many holes, in that the veterans he's signed have not panned out. And part of that's just bad luck, but part of that's on pro scouting too. So this offseason, you have got to really step your game up to get this team to take a step forward. But as far as the retrospective to 2 weeks ago, I think with every passing game, he's being proven more and more correct and just kind of not doing much of anything.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I like using the word like correct. Like I don't know if you get praised for doing nothing. Like, you know what I mean? Like I don't even know if that's the in my head at least the correct terminology. Like he is the constructor of the roster, and it led to this place that they were at the deadline, and it is they weren't going to sell. They weren't, right? And like hindsight's 2020. I'd love to go back in time 2 weeks from today and be like, yo, we're not going to win anyway. Just sell any rentals, because like we're not going to win. Obviously, that's fantastic.
Who do you even sell, though? They don't have that many rentals this year. So even if you could have sold, like, almost your entire team has like a year left on the deal, except for like your fourth liners. There's not really much to sell.
Right. I think there's still, I mean, like we talked earlier in the year about, some of those, like, I think you could have traded Talbot and gotten something, not anything fantastic based on the slide he's had in the second half. But like there's a few guys, but like, anyway, like that's my point is that there was no chance selling was ever on the table. They were in the mix. That was not going to happen. So the two options were to buy, to obviously varying degrees, I guess, or to stand pat. And like technically you made a trade to bring in someone who is playing, bottom 6 minutes and hopefully is producing more than Joe Veleno. But like, I don't think that it's I guess my point is, if a deal presented itself that was worth taking, they would have taken it. It wasn't like a conscious thing where they're like, we're going to do nothing. Like, it was just like they tried and nothing suited their fancy. So they nothing happened. And then they looked back and they went, okay, we made one trade. Like or two, I guess. Like, you know what I mean? I hope I'm articulating this decently. I understand. Like I'm kind of like fumbling around, but
I think you get it. I mean, you're just saying that if a deal came, they were looking to buy, and they pretty much said as much, which is what you're trying to say. But there was never a deal on the table that they thought was worth the assets that they would give up. Yzerman basically said as much during the presser, and you could also make the argument the trade they did make is soft buying, right? Craig Smith is a marginal upgrade over Joe Veleno. It's also an expiring deal, so you get out from underneath that one more deal you had with Joe Veleno, because I believe you had another year left, and you bring in a goaltender. So, like, you're bringing in more assets than you're giving up. You could make an argument that that's soft buying. I feel like a lot of that is just, but the point being is that, in my estimation, no amount of soft buying was going to be a Band-Aid big enough to get this team into the playoffs, right, just based on the way they're playing from here on out. Sure. But you're right. Maybe saying correct, he is correct in doing so, was not the best verbiage. I guess that's more of my subjective opinion than an objective opinion or objective fact. There's no such thing as an objective opinion. But we'll head to a quick break, Scotty, because I think this kind of transitions us into segment 2 here, talking about what they need to do in the offseason, because he may have been correct in that vacuum by my estimation, but that is only because it's his roster that was not up to snuff. And we'll talk about that in segment 2 before previewing the Senators in segment 3. Stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings. If you're like me, your mornings have to start with a good cup of coffee. But I got tired of settling for grocery store brands that just weren't cutting it. That's why I turned to Trade, and let me tell you, that coffee is next level. Trade is the #1 specialty coffee marketplace in the U.S., bringing fresh coffee from over 50 countries' top roasters. Their experts have taste-tested thousands of coffees, curating over 450 amazing roasts. Whether you're new to coffee or know exactly what you like, they'll handpick the perfect match for you. Your first bag is going to be a game changer. It's going to have such a smooth, rich flavor, and you're going to be able to taste the difference from your usual coffee. And the subscription is so easy. No more last-minute grocery store runs or settling for whatever is on the shelf. And if you don't love your first bag, no worries. Trade will replace it for free until they get it just right. There's also a quick quiz, and in under a minute, they'll match you with a roast that is fresh, will smell incredible, and taste even better. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering our listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. That's drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/LockedOnNHL. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right, Scotty. Yzerman's team was not ready to buy at the deadline and shell out the assets required to get players at the deadline because his roster that he constructed was not ready yet. And to be fair, right, to call ourselves out, not to be too emotional and reactionary this late stages, we did predict that this team would slide a little bit backwards. But what we did not predict, Scotty, was that the veterans on this team would continue to largely be ineffective. Alex DeBrincat, obviously, and Patrick Kane are the two exceptions to that rule. But again, how much credit do you give Yzerman for getting those two players when DeBrincat forced his way here and then essentially recruited Patrick Kane? Ben Sherratt has been at best serviceable at times, but in the last couple weeks seems to really be struggling on the top pair yet again. Eric Gustafsson's hurt, but prior to that, not performing well, performing better under McClellan, but not getting the offensive production that you were expecting out of him when you brought him in, and definitely not getting the defensive production you were expecting to get. Justin Holl shouldn't even probably be playing. He should be a seventh defenseman on most teams. The list goes on. JT Compher's having a down year. Vladimir Tarasenko's having a down year. This put the Red Wings in a position where you really had to probably over-rely on your youth to overcompensate for the lack of veteran scoring and secondary production that this team needed to get over the hump. And that's not even, bringing up the fact that goaltending fell off the cliff for like the third consecutive year after about halfway through, because you have goaltenders who aren't traditionally used to playing this much hockey. So, Scotty, the question becomes, what does Yzerman have to do to get this team to the next level this offseason? And when I say take it to the next level, I don't mean Stanley Cup contender. I mean from a wild card threat to just a wild card team. Get them in the playoff. No more of this flirting, right? And breaking their hearts. Get this team to be a playoff team next year.
Yeah, man, the bar has to start at just making the postseason, period. I mean, it's been collapse after collapse after collapse at the deadline now. It's such a broad question, like what does this team need? A lot, man.
A lot.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of puzzling, and I think it's fair to criticize that. This team needs a lot, right? We are years and years into 6 years into the Yzerman hire, and on top of that, like you don't expect him to turn around what he was given in the first couple of years. Like that is ridiculous. That's an absurd ask. But the last 3 years, we'll call it, a lot of the NHL signings that he has made have been absolutely brutal. And I think there's an argument you could say all. Like, I don't want to get too dramatic, but like there hasn't been like a major home run signing. There was the DeBrincat trade, which is looking great, and then an extension. I guess that might count, but I think it kind of goes without saying, one of the biggest things that this team needs to improve on is just the NHL additions. Like, I don't know how else to word it. I was trying to find a more like articulate way of wording that. I think just the additions at the NHL level need to be a lot better. And like you have a core, and that is such a huge first step. And you have a great farm system that has a lot of talent coming through the pipeline that you can add around your core and add to your core. But the players that you get externally to surround the in-house core need to be way, way, way better. And like, that's not a specific group, right? We need goaltending, we need defense, we need depth scoring. Guess what? That's all three levels. I'm not just going to sit here and list off every single position in hockey and be like, the Wings need it. The fact of the matter is, the people they do bring in just need to be way, way, way more productive than the people they have been bringing in, which is super Captain Obvious, but like it's true.
Correct. This team desperately needs a little bit of a shakeup. I think that Yzerman, for this team to take a step forward, and my patience is starting to wear out with Yzerman, especially with his veterans. Like, we can sing the praises of the youth all day long, right? The youth is here. The youth is taking step forwards. They're going to continue to get better. That's great. You mentioned it. The core is here. That's great. But we're talking specifically like you need veterans on this team that aren't going to just be dead weight, right? If the best you can get out of these veterans that you're spending $3 to $5 to $6 million on in free agency, and the best case scenario is they give you just an okay season, that's not acceptable, right? Because some of these veterans are playing in meaningful roles, right? Ben Sherratt, you signed to a 4-year deal. You still have another year left on him, and he's on your top pair. That can't be the case going into next year. Jeff Petry's obviously going to be gone, but who's going to fill that role in the second pair? Is it going to be Albert Johansson? You still need a bona fide top 4 defenseman. And then you have so many forwards still under contract too, right? Like, you have Kopp, you have Comfer, you have Tarasenko. Those guys have a year or two each left on their contract. So you need to do something to offload some. And none of these contracts are so big and bloated that it's going to weigh you down, right? It's not going to stop you from having the ability to do things in this offseason. But they're not. as a whole, they're not positively benefiting this team, pushing this team's for the narrative forward. They're not moving the needle.
One by one.
Right.
One by one, they are not big enough to weigh it down. But you look at 4 guys making $22 million that have produced nothing. That is a problem.
So you got to get rid of a Tarasenko. You got to get rid of a Hole. And that's the start, right? You got to shake up the roster. You got to offload some contracts this offseason. And then you got to swing for the fences this year. You've got to get someone of meaning in this locker room. And I know all 32 teams are going to be swinging for the fences for Mitch Marner. But if you're the Detroit Red Wings, that's a guy who instantly comes in and not just as, he's this season so far in 70 games, he's got 86 points. He'd be your leading point getter. He's got 64 assists. That's a guy who has a playmaking ability that would fit so well on your top line and is so good, because I know a lot of our issues are defensively, right? But sometimes you can get guys who are so good in one category that it helps cover up the deficiencies in others. You bring in Mitch Marner, you're possessing the puck a lot more. Newsflash, if you have the puck a lot more, you're giving up a lot less goals too. So it'll help you be better defensively when you're in the offensive zone more. And I know, again, that's a pipe dream. Everybody's going to be going for Marner. But those are the types of swings you got to take this year, because this team, as it stands, they don't have what it takes to really push the narrative forward. I'm a big Aaron Ekblad fan, and obviously he's suspended 20 games for PEDs, but that's another guy at Target. He's 29 years old, so obviously he's a little bit older than Mitch Marner is, but he's a bona fide top 4 right side D-man who plays with an edge, an element that this team desperately needs, and he's good at his position. I know he's not, the premier defenseman in the league, but he can play his position well. So there's guys like that who you're gonna have to overpay for. Right? And this is something that, circling back to what you mentioned a few weeks ago, right? Like at a certain point, that's just the market. So you're going to have to probably overpay for one of these impact players if you want to really push this team ahead, especially with the cap rising. So like Marner's going to command $13-14 million. Do it. It's just, as it stands right now, you sorely lack one, probably 2 top 4 defensemen and another bona fide top 6 forward. The bottom 6, that'll fill itself out. Like you can get bottom 6 players.
We haven't got any production from the bottom 6. What bottom 6, dude? That's what, you know what I mean? Like it's been what we've been complaining about all year. Like I would significantly prefer a guy that is paid, one guy that is paid a ton and produces, like Marner, right? For example. And then the rest that you need to fill out just is your like internal, farm system that is one of the better farm systems in hockey. Like I would significantly prefer that than not spending that much money on one player, divvying that up between 3 guys that do absolutely nothing. Like I would significantly prefer the former.
Would you rather spend $13 million on 5 players that give you a combined 60 points, or $13 million on one player who's going to get you 90? Like, I'm sorry, right. It speaks for itself in my opinion on that one. Like, we desperately need a difference maker on both offense and defense right now, because Moritz Seider's getting killed playing with Ben Sherratt. You want Edvinsson maybe back together. I could go on and on. I should stop myself. The end of the line here, the bottom line here is that Yzerman has to and needs to make an impact addition this offseason, or else I'm going to really start calling into question his tenure as general manager, because his free agent acquisitions thus far have not helped this team take meaningful step forward. And that has to change this offseason if you want this core with Dylan Larkin in his prime to be a playoff team.
Agreed.
All right, we're going to do a quick break. When we return, we will preview the Ottawa Senators. Stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job posts seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page and help you find and reach the right candidates faster. Now you can speed up the hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Indeed is all you need. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right, Scotty, the fourth and final matchup between the Detroit Red Wings and the Ottawa Senators is tonight. It will be broadcasted on Fox 2. Keep that in mind to everybody who's listening. You can watch this on your local television channels with a digital antenna. Fox 2 is going to be airing this game, and it's a big one for the Red Wings. Every single game from here on out is a big one. That kind of goes without saying. But the Ottawa Senators have lost 3 of their last 4. Suddenly, Montreal's in striking distance of that first wild card. So, one, it would be great for your own purposes to get 2 points at home, but also it's great to play spoiler to the big rival Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, this is one where you can kind of just throw the season and the collapse out the window. Like, I just want to beat Ottawa because I just like beating Ottawa, and we don't do it very often, not nearly as much as we should. So yeah, like playoff implications. Are we still in it? Are we not? Blah, 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 blah. Just go beat the Ottawa Senators because it's fun to beat the Ottawa Senators.
Absolutely. And I mean, the biggest hurdle, I think, if you're a Red Wings fan and beating the Senators, is going to be their goaltender, Linus Ullmark, who has been much better as the season has gone on.
Fantastic.
Yep. And he goalied you the last time you played the Sens. You outplayed the Senators, but he stood on his head, only allowing 1 goal on something like 35 shots, insane like that. Tim Stützle leads the way in scoring for them, 70 points in 70 games. Then it's Batherson with 57. That's the thing about the Senators right now, is they're kind of scoring by committee. They have 4 players over 20 goals, not a single one over 30. It's just everyone's been contributing in different ways. Nobody's kind of been running away with the scoring race, kind of like what's happening with DeBrincat in Detroit. Of course, Larkin, I think, has 28. It's the second highest amount. So there's not a single player on this team that you can focus in on. It's going to be every single one of that Ottawa Senators team is kind of playing together right now as a good unit. But catch them while they're reeling a little bit. They're on a little 3 out of 4 losing skid, and maybe get yourself a little bit closer to that second wild card spot.
Yeah. I mean, this is a team that obviously this fan base knows very well, and that we know what to expect. It's going to be a physical, high intensity, rivalry-like atmosphere. And you have to take advantage of that, because usually when Ottawa plays that way against Detroit, they end up
fold.
Yeah, they end up crushing you. So you gotta, hold your own there. And they are. I like that you mentioned the by committee thing, because if you look at their team stats, they're not like fantastic in anything. They're just like 5 or 6 spots ahead of the Red Wings and everything. Like the Wings are like in the like mid or low 20s in like team rankings, and just about, obviously loosely, but like in a lot of those stats. And Ottawa's more like, 15 to 19 in a lot of those. So you're talking about a team that is obviously more primed in the standings, and is looking to get a win against you regardless, because you're the Red Wings and they don't like you. But on top of that, it's obviously very, very meaningful to both teams. So, I
mean, that's such a good point that you bring up too, right? They're 16th dead center in the league in shot attempt share at 5-on-5. They're 19th in expected goal share at 5-on-5, and then just pure goals for versus against, right? Your goals for percentage. They're actually 27th at 5-on-5. They're not like, even though they're at one point we're running away with the first wild card, still got a pretty good grasp on it. They're not so much a better team than the Detroit Red Wings. The problem is they just play a style of hockey that the Red Wings struggle with, which is incredibly physical, hard forechecking game. So you know what the assignment is. We know we won't be seeing Elmer Soderblom in this hockey game either. McClellan said in the post game of the game against Colorado that he re-aggravated the injury, so he's not going to play on Thursday, which likely means we'll be seeing Berggren again. The big question is will we be seeing Kosa, or will we be seeing Lyon, or maybe Talbot even? I guess we'll find that out tomorrow. If Kosa is reassigned to Grand Rapids, we will know Talbot is good to go. Otherwise, I mean, I stand by it. If you are running Kosa and Lyon tomorrow, I start Kosa.
I want Kosa to get playing time. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So I understand big rival, high leverage. You don't want to ruin a goalie's confidence, but also, like, what good is it doing him to sit on the bench? Meanwhile, you know what Lyon is, but you have this high-profile prospect on the bench. Like, one game's not going to end his career. Like, come on. Let's throw him out there, see what the unknown commodity can get us.
Yeah.
Scotty, any final thoughts?
Go Tigers.
Go Tigers.
We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow, recapping the game against the Ottawa Senators. So stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.